Alexander White had spent his life in control, until tonight. Sitting in an exclusive restaurant, he expected nothing more than a quiet dinner. But then, two little girls appeared beside his table, their wide blue eyes locked on him. And then one of them spoke. "Daddy." The word hit him like a thunderclap. He didn't have children. He couldn't have children. Yet here they were, looking at him as if he was the only person in the world who mattered. For the first time ever, Alexander White was completely lost. Alexander White sat at his usual table in one of the most luxurious restaurants in New York, enjoying a quiet evening alone. The dim lighting, the soft hum of conversation, and the sound of a piano playing in the background created the perfect atmosphere for him to unwind after another exhausting day at work. He swirled the deep red wine in his glass, staring at the reflection of the chandelier on the table. Life had rewarded him handsomely, his company was thriving, his investments were growing, and his name carried weight in the business world. Yet, as he took another sip of wine, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was missing. He had spent years chasing success, building an empire, and accumulating wealth, but true fulfillment still eluded him. Just as he was about to call for the check, a quiet yet distinct voice reached his ears from the side. "Daddy." The word sliced through his thoughts like a knife, making his entire body tense. He slowly turned his head, expecting to see some mistake, perhaps a child confusing him for someone else. But when his eyes met those of the two little girls standing beside his table, he felt his breath catch in his throat. They were identical, around 6 years old, with long, wavy blonde hair neatly pinned back with small white barrettes. Their striking blue eyes stared at him with a mixture of hesitation and hope. Dressed in simple white t-shirts, they looked out of place in the upscale restaurant, but their presence was more than just unexpected, it was shocking. Alexander's grip tightened on the stem of his wine glass as he searched for words. He blinked a few times, convinced that exhaustion or the dim lighting was playing tricks on him. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" he asked, his voice calmer than he felt. The bolder of the two, the one who had spoken first, took a tiny step closer. "You're our daddy," she repeated, her voice soft but unwavering. For the first time in years, Alexander felt truly lost. His mind raced, trying to grasp what was happening. He had no children. He had never been married. He had been careful in his past relationships, ensuring that nothing unexpected would come from them. This had to be a mistake. A woman, who appeared to be in her 50s, approached the table and gently placed a hand on each girl's shoulder. She looked at Alexander with an expression that was both apologetic and serious. "Mr. White, I'm sorry to interrupt your evening. My name is Linda. I'm the girl's nanny. I believe we need to talk." Alexander inhaled deeply, trying to steady himself. The room suddenly felt smaller, the once comforting dim lighting now pressing in on him. His mind refused to accept what was happening, yet his instincts told him that this was not a joke or a misunderstanding. These girls were here for a reason. He glanced at them again, really looking this time. The shape of their eyes, the curve of their jawlines, the golden blonde of their hair, it was impossible to ignore. His chest tightened, and an unfamiliar weight settled in his stomach. "Please," Linda said gently, "just hear me out." Alexander didn't move for a moment, his fingers still wrapped around his glass, but then he exhaled and set it down. With a nod, he gestured to the empty seats at his table. "All right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Start talking." Alexander sat in stunned silence as Linda helped the two little girls into their seats. His heart pounded in his chest, but his expression remained carefully neutral, the years of corporate training allowing him to mask the turmoil inside. He folded his hands on the table, willing himself to stay calm even though every fiber of his being screamed that this was impossible. The girls, sitting across from him, seemed just as nervous as he was. One of them, the one who had spoken first, kept glancing at him with wide, expectant eyes, while the other shifted uncomfortably in her seat, gripping the edge of the table as if afraid he might disappear at any moment. Linda, the woman who had introduced herself as their nanny, cleared her throat softly before speaking. I know this must be overwhelming, Mr. White, but please don't dismiss it just yet. I promised their mother I would find you, and I need you to hear me out. At the mention of their mother, Alexander felt a strange pressure in his chest. He wasn't sure what he had been expecting, but somehow, hearing those words made the situation feel even more real. His mind was racing, flipping through the years, searching for any possibility that what they were saying could be true. I don't have children, he finally said, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. I think there's been a mistake. Linda let out a quiet sigh, as if she had been expecting this reaction. Their mother's name was Catherine Brooks, she said carefully, watching his face. The name hit him like a physical blow. His breath caught, and for the first time since the girls appeared at his table, the world around him seemed to blur. Catherine. The only woman he had ever truly loved. The woman who had vanished from his life without an explanation 8 years ago. He had spent months trying to find her, but she had simply disappeared. He had convinced himself that she had moved on, that she had chosen a life without him. And now, sitting across from him, were 2 little girls with her eyes and his hair. He shook his head, struggling to process what he was hearing. No. That's not possible. If she had children, she would have told me. She would have. She didn't, Linda interrupted gently. She was scared, Alex. Hearing his name spoken so familiarly by a stranger only unsettled him further. He clenched his jaw, his hands curling into fists on the table. Scared of what? Linda hesitated for a moment, glancing at the girls before answering. Scared that telling you would change your life in a way you weren't ready for. She found out she was pregnant after you had already started your company, when everything was just taking off. She knew how ambitious you were, how hard you had worked to get where you were. She convinced herself that if she told you, you might feel obligated to stay, and she didn't want to hold you back. Alexander's stomach twisted painfully. The idea that Catherine had kept something this massive from him, that she had made such a life-altering decision on her own, filled him with a complicated mix of anger and grief. He wanted to demand why she hadn't given him a choice, why she had decided for him. But Catherine was gone now, and there were no answers to be found. What happened to her? He asked, his voice quieter than before. Linda's expression softened with sadness. She passed away 6 months ago. Cancer. The word sent a sharp pain through his chest. He looked at the girls, who had been silent this whole time, their small hands resting on the edge of the table. They had lost their mother, and now they were here, looking at him as if hoping he could fill the emptiness she had left behind. His mind screamed that this was too much, too sudden, too unreal. But deep inside, something told him that it wasn't a mistake. He saw it in their eyes. In the way they looked at him, as if he was the only thing in the world that mattered right now. One of the girls, the quieter one, finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you mad at us? The innocence in her question shattered something inside him. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. No, he said, the word leaving his lips before he had time to think. I'm not mad. The bolder twin, the one who had spoken first, straightened slightly in her seat, as if relieved by his answer. Mommy told us about you, she said. She said you were smart and really busy and that you worked a lot. But she said you were nice, too. Alexander felt an ache deep in his chest. He had been a ghost in their lives, a name their mother spoke of but someone they had never known. And now, here they were, sitting in front of him, expecting something from him, something he wasn't sure he knew how to give. Linda placed a comforting hand on the back of one of the girls' chairs before speaking again. They don't expect you to know what to do right away, Mr. White. But they needed to find you. And now that they have, the only question is, what happens next? Alexander let out a slow breath. His world had just changed in an instant, and for the first time in his life, he had no idea what came next. Alexander sat there in silence, staring at the two little girls across the table, his mind spinning with the weight of everything Linda had just told him. The revelation felt like a tidal wave crashing over him, pulling him under before he even had a chance to catch his breath. Catherine was gone. She had been gone for 6 months, and he hadn't known. She had been sick, possibly suffering for years, and he hadn't been there. And now, sitting in front of him, were the daughters he never knew existed, looking at him with cautious hope, as if afraid he might reject them. The reality of it all was suffocating. Linda, sitting beside the twins, remained quiet for a moment, giving him time to process. Alexander clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. He wanted to be rational, to analyze the situation like he would a business deal, to ask for proof and demand explanations. But the logical part of his mind was at war with the overwhelming emotions he was trying so hard to suppress. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rougher than before. How do I even know this is true? He hated the way the question sounded, but he couldn't just accept something this monumental without being sure. Did Catherine ever try to contact me? Did she ever leave any, he hesitated, his throat tightening, any message? Anything? Linda nodded, as if she had been expecting the question. She wanted to. But every time she thought about reaching out, she convinced herself that it was too late. She told me that she didn't want to disrupt your life, that you were doing exactly what you had always dreamed of. By the time she realized she had made a mistake, she was already sick, and she didn't want your first experience with your daughters to be tied to her illness. Her words hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. The idea that Catherine had spent years debating whether or not to tell him, that she had struggled with that decision alone, made his chest tighten with frustration. He could feel anger bubbling inside him, not at the girls, not at Linda, but at Catherine. She had no right to keep this from him. No right to make a decision that affected all of them. Before he could respond, one of the girls, Sophia, he thought, though he wasn't sure yet which was which, spoke again. "We brought something," she said, reaching into the small backpack she had with her. Her tiny hands trembled slightly as she pulled out a faded envelope and carefully slid it across the table toward him. "Mommy wrote this before she went to heaven." Alexander's heart pounded as he stared at the envelope in front of him. His name was written on the front in Catherine's familiar handwriting, slightly shaky but unmistakable. His hands felt heavy as he reached for it, carefully picking it up, as if it might crumble under his touch. He turned it over, his fingers lingering on the seal before finally breaking it open. The letter inside was short, but every word felt like a weight pressing down on him. Alex. I wish I had been braver. I wish I had told you the truth sooner. I should have never made this decision for you, and I'm so sorry that I did. But if you're reading this, it means you've met them, and that's all I ever wanted. They're incredible, Alex. They're smart and kind, and they have your determination. They've been asking about you for a long time, and I was too weak to bring myself to find you when I had the chance. But now, they need you. And no matter how much time has passed, I know you will love them. I know because I did. More than anything in this world, Catherine. Alexander closed his eyes, exhaling slowly as he set the letter down on the table. His chest ached, his emotions tangled in a way he had never experienced before. The anger he had felt moments ago had dulled into something else, grief, regret, and something deeper that he couldn't quite name. He looked up at the two girls, who were watching him carefully, waiting for his reaction. He had spent his whole life believing he was in control. Every decision he made, every risk he took, was calculated and deliberate. He had built his career on logic and precision, ensuring that nothing ever caught him off guard. But this was something he never could have prepared for. Taking a deep breath, he met their eyes and finally spoke. "I don't know how to do this." The admission felt foreign on his tongue, but it was the truth. "I don't know how to be a father. I don't know what you need from me. The quieter twin, Lily, shifted slightly in her seat before answering. "We don't know either," she admitted. "We just wanted to find you." Something in Alexander's chest cracked. He had been so consumed by his own emotions that he hadn't stopped to think about how terrifying this must have been for them. They had lost their mother, the only parent they had ever known, and instead of staying in the only life they were familiar with, they had come searching for a man they had never met, hoping that he would want them. The realization made his decision for him. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know how to be a father. But he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to walk away. "We'll figure it out," he said after a moment, his voice steadier this time. "Together." A slow smile spread across Sophia's face, while Lily gave a small nod, as if accepting his promise. Linda let out a quiet sigh of relief, but Alexander barely noticed. His entire world had just shifted beneath him, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about work, or success, or the life he had built for himself. He was thinking about them. The drive back to Alexander's penthouse was silent, but it was not the uncomfortable kind of silence he had expected. The girls sat quietly in the back seat, their small hands resting in their laps, occasionally stealing glances at him through the rearview mirror. Linda sat beside them, her expression calm but observant, as if she were gauging his reaction to everything that had just unfolded. Alexander kept his focus on the road, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than necessary, his mind racing with thoughts he wasn't ready to process. The weight of the evening pressed down on him, and yet, underneath the overwhelming uncertainty, there was something else, something unfamiliar. When they arrived at his building, the doorman greeted him with his usual polite nod, but his eyes lingered on the two small girls trailing behind him. Alexander wasn't used to people looking at him with curiosity. He was always in control, always composed. But tonight, he felt exposed, as if the world could see right through him and into the chaos unraveling in his mind. Inside the penthouse, the girls hesitated at the entrance, their gazes flickering around the massive space before them. The high ceilings, the sleek modern furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, it was a place built for a man who lived alone, not for two little girls who had just lost their mother. He realized, with a strange pang of guilt, that there was nothing here for them. No toys, no books, no sign that a child had ever stepped foot in this space before. Lily shifted uncomfortably, her fingers lightly brushing against her sister's arm as if seeking reassurance. Sophia, the bolder of the two, looked up at him. "This is your house." Alexander exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "It's home." The word felt strange now. For years, this place had been his sanctuary, his escape from the world. But tonight, it felt cold, like an empty shell. Linda, sensing the tension, placed a hand on the back of one of the chairs and smiled gently. "It's very nice, Mr. White." A bit minimalistic, but nice. He knew what she meant. There were no personal touches, no warmth. Just expensive furniture and art pieces chosen more for their aesthetic value than anything else. It was the kind of home that looked perfect in magazines but didn't feel lived in. Sophia took a few hesitant steps inside, her small fingers trailing across the edge of the polished marble table. "It's really big," she said. "Like a castle." Lily finally let go of her hesitation and walked further in, her eyes scanning the space as if trying to decide whether or not she belonged here. Alexander wasn't sure what he was supposed to do. He had agreed to take them in, but now that they were actually standing in his home, reality was sinking in. He had no idea how to take care of children. Linda must have sensed his internal panic because she stepped forward and gave him a reassuring smile. "I can stay with them tonight, if that's all right with you. Just until they settle in." He nodded, relieved. "That would probably be best." Sophia looked up at him again. "Where do we sleep?" That was another thing he hadn't thought about. His penthouse had 2 guest rooms, both of which were designed for occasional visitors, not for two little girls who had just lost everything they knew. He led them down the hallway, opening the door to one of the rooms. It was immaculate, with neutral-colored walls and a large bed that looked untouched. There were no stuffed animals, no posters, no warmth. Just a place to sleep. Lily hesitated at the doorway, hugging herself. "It's really quiet here," she murmured. Alexander felt something tighten in his chest. He wasn't sure why those words affected him the way they did, but they did. He had lived in silence for so long, never questioning it. But now, for the first time, it felt deafening. "If you need anything," he said, clearing his throat, "I'll be in my room." Sophia gave him a small nod, but Lily hesitated, looking at him with those same bright blue eyes that were too familiar. "Are you going to leave too?" The question caught him off guard. He stared at her, unsure how to answer. He realized then that this wasn't just about tonight. These girls had already lost their mother. They had taken a risk coming here, hoping that the father they had never met would want them. And now, standing in front of him, Lily wasn't just asking if he was leaving the room, she was asking if he was going to leave them. He crouched down so that he was at eye level with her, something instinctive pushing him to make sure she understood. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You're not alone." Lily studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether or not she could trust his words. Then, without warning, she wrapped her small arms around his neck in a quick but tight hug before pulling away just as fast. Alexander sat frozen, caught completely off guard by the sudden contact. He wasn't sure what to do with the warmth that spread through his chest. Sophia smiled softly. "Good night, Daddy." The word hit him like a lightning bolt. It was the first time one of them had said it without hesitation. He wasn't sure he deserved it yet, but as he stood up and turned off the light, he found himself saying something he never thought he would. "Good night, girls." And for the first time in years, the silence in his home didn't feel so empty. Alexander barely slept that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind refusing to quiet down. The events of the evening played over and over in his head, from the moment the girls had walked up to him in the restaurant to the last thing Sophia had said before he turned off the light. "Good night, Daddy." He wasn't sure why that word unsettled him so much. Maybe it was because he hadn't done anything to earn it yet. Maybe it was because it forced him to confront something he had never truly thought about, what it actually meant to be a father. He had built his life on control, on calculated decisions and precise planning. He had never made a move without considering every possible outcome. But there was nothing about this that he had planned for. There was no roadmap, no strategy that could prepare him for two little girls who had just lost their mother and were now looking at him to be something he had no idea how to be. The quiet of the penthouse felt heavier than usual, no longer a peaceful retreat but rather an unfamiliar space that no longer belonged to just him. He turned onto his side, exhaling slowly, but just as he was about to close his eyes, he heard it, a faint sound coming from down the hall. Sitting up, he listened more carefully. It was quiet at first, almost hesitant, but then he recognized it. Soft crying. He ran a hand over his face before pushing back the blankets and getting out of bed. His footsteps were nearly silent as he walked down the hallway, pausing at the door to the guest room. The door was slightly ajar, and when he peeked inside, his chest tightened. Lily was sitting up in bed, hugging a pillow tightly to her chest, her shoulders trembling with quiet sobs. The dim glow from the hallway light illuminated her small figure, making her look even smaller than she already was. Sophia was asleep beside her, curled up under the blankets, unaware of her sister's distress. Alexander hesitated. He wasn't used to dealing with emotions, not his own and certainly not someone else's. But something inside him told him to step forward instead of walking away. He knocked lightly on the doorframe, keeping his voice soft. "Lily?" She stiffened at the sound of his voice, quickly wiping at her eyes with the sleeve of her oversized t-shirt. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice wavered. Alexander sighed and stepped inside, lowering himself to sit on the edge of the bed. "You don't have to be fine," he said after a moment. "It's okay to be sad." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she clutched the pillow tighter, her small fingers digging into the fabric. "I miss Mommy," she finally whispered. His throat tightened. He had no idea what it was like to lose a parent at such a young age. His own parents had never been particularly warm, more focused on shaping him into the man they expected him to be than on offering comfort or affection. But he knew loss in other ways. He knew what it was like to wake up one day and realize that something you had taken for granted was gone forever. He took a slow breath. "She loved you a lot." Lily nodded, sniffling. "She used to sing to us when we couldn't sleep. She always made us feel safe." Her voice broke on the last word, and another tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Alexander hesitated again, unsure of what to do. But then, before he could overthink it, he did something that surprised even himself. He reached out and gently wiped the tear from her cheek with his thumb. It was an awkward, uncertain gesture, but Lily didn't pull away. Instead, she looked up at him with those wide blue eyes that were so much like his own. "Are we going to have to leave?" she asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. He frowned. "Leave?" She bit her lip, her gaze dropping to the pillow in her lap. "People always leave," she said quietly. "Mommy used to say we'd always be together, but then she got sick and," she trailed off, squeezing her eyes shut for a moment before continuing. "I know we can't go back to our old house. But what if you don't want us here?" Alexander felt something in his chest twist painfully. He had been so focused on his own uncertainties that he hadn't even considered what this must feel like for them. They had already lost their mother. The only family they had left was a man they had never met before tonight. Of course they were afraid. His next words came without hesitation. "You're not going anywhere." Lily lifted her head again, searching his face for any sign that he was just saying what she wanted to hear. "I mean it," he said, his voice firmer now. "You're staying here. This is your home now." Her lower lip trembled, and for a brief moment, he thought she might cry again. But then, to his surprise, she nodded and leaned forward slightly, resting her forehead against his arm in a silent gesture of trust. It lasted only a few seconds before she pulled away again, but something about it made Alexander feel like he had just been given something precious, something fragile and important. He cleared his throat, trying to shake the unfamiliar emotions settling in his chest. "Do you want me to stay until you fall asleep?" Lily hesitated, then gave a small nod. So he stayed. He wasn't sure how long he sat there, watching as her breathing eventually evened out, her grip on the pillow loosening as she finally drifted off to sleep. When he was sure she was settled, he carefully stood up, glancing at both girls one last time before quietly leaving the room. As he walked back to his own bedroom, he realized something that both unsettled and comforted him at the same time. He wasn't just responsible for them now. He wanted to be. Alexander woke up earlier than usual the next morning. The sun had barely started to rise, casting a soft, golden light over the city skyline through his bedroom windows. He sat up slowly, rubbing a hand over his face, his mind still foggy from a night of restless sleep. The events of the previous evening felt surreal, but as soon as he stepped out of his room and glanced down the hall toward the guest room, reality hit him again. They were still here. He hadn't dreamed it. The two little girls sleeping in the guest room were real. They were his daughters. And his life was no longer just his own. The thought sent a strange mix of emotions through him, uncertainty, apprehension, and something he couldn't quite define yet. It wasn't fear, though it was close. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of something unknown, something irreversible. He made his way to the kitchen, needing coffee before he could even begin to process what came next. The familiar ritual of grinding the beans, pouring the water, and waiting for the rich scent to fill the air gave him a few moments of normalcy. But just as he took his first sip, a small, hesitant sound came from behind him. He turned to see Lily standing in the doorway, her hair slightly messy from sleep, the hem of her oversized t-shirt brushing against her knees. She looked unsure, as if she wasn't sure whether she was allowed to be here. "Good morning," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. Lily hesitated for a second before offering a small, shy smile. "Good morning." Alexander set down his coffee cup. "Did you sleep okay?" She nodded but didn't move from her spot in the doorway. She was hugging her arms around herself, her small fingers gripping the fabric of her shirt. He realized she was waiting for something, maybe for permission to come further into the space, maybe for reassurance that she belonged here. He gestured toward one of the kitchen stools. "You hungry?" That was all it took. She nodded again, this time more eagerly, and climbed onto the stool, watching him closely. He wasn't sure what 6-year-olds typically ate for breakfast. His own mornings usually consisted of black coffee and a protein shake, neither of which seemed remotely appropriate for a child. He opened the fridge, scanning its contents. There wasn't much, mostly pre-prepared meals from the private chef he rarely saw, expensive cheeses and wines, and a few items he barely touched. There was no cereal, no fruit juice, nothing remotely child-friendly. Lily swung her legs idly, her expression curious but patient. He exhaled, shutting the fridge. "All right," he said, thinking fast. "How do you feel about pancakes?" Lily's face lit up with surprise. "You can make pancakes?" Alexander hesitated, realizing his mistake. "I can figure it out," he said, more to himself than to her. She giggled softly, a sound so small and unexpected that it caught him off guard. He wasn't used to the sound of children's laughter in his home. He wasn't used to any of this. Moving to the pantry, he searched for ingredients, relieved when he found flour, eggs, and milk. He wasn't completely helpless in the kitchen, he could cook when necessary, though he usually didn't have to. But as he started mixing the batter, he could feel Lily's eyes on him, watching his every move as if he were doing something extraordinary. "You look serious," she said after a moment. He glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. "Serious?" She nodded. "Like you're making an important business deal." The unexpected observation made him pause. He realized that he was approaching this task with the same focused determination he applied to everything in his life. As if making pancakes was a problem to be solved, a skill to be mastered. He huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "Maybe I am," he said. "If I mess this up, I'll lose my credibility." Lily giggled again, covering her mouth with her hands. The sound did something to him, something unfamiliar but not unwelcome. A few minutes later, when the first pancake landed on the plate, slightly uneven but still recognizable, Lily leaned forward eagerly. "That looks good." Alexander slid the plate in front of her and handed her a fork. Moment of truth. She cut off a small piece and took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. He waited, watching for her reaction as if he were waiting for a boardroom verdict. Finally, she swallowed and grinned. "It's really good." Something inside him eased, though he wasn't sure why. Just then, the sound of soft footsteps came from the hallway, and Sophia appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes sleepily. She paused when she saw them, her gaze flicking between her sister and Alexander, as if trying to figure out what she had missed. Lily turned toward her excitedly. "Daddy made pancakes." Alexander tensed at the word again, but this time, he didn't flinch. Sophia blinked, then moved closer. "You know how to make pancakes?" Lily answered for him before he could. "Yep. He's really serious about it." Sophia giggled as she climbed onto the stool beside her sister. Alexander watched them, something shifting inside him as he realized that this quiet, simple moment, was the first time his penthouse had ever felt like a home. He poured more batter into the pan, his movements more relaxed now. "You want some too?" he asked Sophia. She nodded quickly. "Yes, please." For the first time since they arrived, Alexander felt like maybe, just maybe, he was capable of doing this. Maybe being their father wasn't something that had to be figured out all at once. Maybe it was something that would come in moments like this, one step, one breakfast, one laugh at a time. Over the next few days, Alexander's carefully structured life unraveled in ways he had never anticipated. He had built his world around efficiency, precision, and control. Now, none of those things seemed to matter. His mornings no longer started with quiet solitude and coffee in silence. Instead, they began with the sound of small footsteps running across the hardwood floors, giggles echoing through his once immaculate penthouse, and the constant presence of two little girls who somehow made his perfectly ordered world feel completely chaotic yet strangely fuller than it had ever been. Adjusting to their presence was more difficult than he wanted to admit. He was used to schedules, meetings, and predictable routines. But children, especially 6-year-old twins who had just lost their mother, didn't follow schedules. They didn't fit neatly into his world. They asked endless questions, interrupted his phone calls, left their toys scattered across his pristine living room, and filled the space with an energy he hadn't realized was missing. The hardest part wasn't the noise or the interruptions. It was the responsibility. Every time he looked at them, he was reminded that he wasn't just temporarily watching over them. They were his. His daughters. They depended on him now. And the weight of that realization was heavier than anything he had ever carried before. One afternoon, as he sat at his desk trying to respond to emails, he heard a soft knock at the door. He looked up to see Sophia peeking her head inside, her expression hesitant but curious. "Can I come in?" she asked. Alexander glanced at his screen, then back at her. He had a dozen things to do, calls to return, problems at the company that needed his attention. But something about the way she stood there, waiting for his approval, made all of those things feel suddenly insignificant. "Yeah," he said, setting his laptop aside. "Come in." Sophia stepped inside, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. She looked around his office, taking in the dark wood furniture, the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and the massive windows overlooking the city. Her eyes landed on a framed photo sitting on the desk. It was the only personal item in the entire space, a picture of Alexander from years ago, standing beside a younger version of himself and his father. "Is that your dad?" she asked, pointing at the photo. Alexander hesitated before nodding. "Yeah. That was a long time ago." Sophia tilted her head, studying the image. "Was he nice?" The question caught him off guard. He hadn't thought about his father in a long time, at least not in a way that felt personal. His father had been strict, disciplined, always pushing him toward success. Love, in his household, had been conditional, something earned, not freely given. "He was tough," Alexander finally said. "He wanted me to be successful. He wanted me to be prepared for the world." Sophia frowned slightly. "Did he ever play with you?" Alexander almost laughed at the thought. "No. He wasn't the kind of dad who played games or told bedtime stories. He taught me how to work hard, how to be responsible, how to win." Sophia didn't say anything for a moment, just traced the edge of the desk with her fingers. Then she looked up at him with those same blue eyes that had been haunting him since the moment he met them. "Are you going to be like that with us?" Alexander felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't know how to answer that. He had spent his whole life following the example his father had set. But now, looking at Sophia, he realized he didn't want to be that kind of father. "No," he said, his voice quieter now. "I don't think I will." Sophia seemed satisfied with that answer. She nodded and then, as if she hadn't just asked him a question that had shaken him to his core, she changed the subject. "Can we do something fun today?" Alexander blinked. "Fun?" She nodded eagerly. Yeah. Like, go somewhere. We've been in the apartment a lot. Mommy used to take us to the park, and sometimes we'd go get ice cream. Can we do that? Alexander hesitated. He wasn't used to making decisions like this. His plans usually revolved around business meetings, not afternoon outings with two 6-year-olds. But when he saw the hopeful expression on her face, he realized there was only one real answer. Yeah, he said. We can do that. Sophia beamed. Really? Really, he confirmed. Within minutes, the apartment was filled with excitement. Sophia ran to tell Lily, who immediately started jumping up and down with enthusiasm. Linda smiled knowingly as she watched them, offering to help get them ready. An hour later, Alexander found himself in an unfamiliar situation, walking through a park on a sunny afternoon, watching as the two little girls he had just met days ago ran ahead, laughing and chasing each other through the grass. He had spent years in boardrooms, on private jets, in meetings with some of the most powerful people in the world. He had closed deals worth millions, built an empire from nothing. But none of that had prepared him for this, for the simple act of standing in a park, watching his daughters chase butterflies and giggle as they ran through the warm summer air. After the park, they went to a small ice cream shop nearby. Lily took forever to decide on a flavor, while Sophia immediately chose chocolate. They sat outside at a table, their legs swinging as they ate, ice cream dripping onto their fingers. Alexander watched them, something settling inside him that he hadn't expected. This wasn't part of his plan. His life wasn't supposed to look like this. But for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the company, the stock market, or his next big deal. He was just here, in this moment, with them. As they finished their ice cream, Sophia looked up at him with a thoughtful expression. You know, Daddy, she said, as if she had been thinking about it for a while, you're actually kind of fun. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Kind of. She grinned. Yeah. For someone who looks serious all the time. Lily giggled, nodding in agreement. Yeah, you do look serious. Alexander smirked, shaking his head. I'll work on that. They walked back to the car together, and as he helped them into their seats, he realized something that hadn't fully clicked before. He had spent his entire life chasing success, thinking that his greatest achievements would come from the empire he had built. But right now, as he listened to the sound of their laughter in the back seat, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, his greatest achievement was sitting right here beside him. The following weeks brought more changes than Alexander had ever anticipated. He had once believed that his life was set in stone, that his world revolved around boardrooms, negotiations, and carefully calculated risks. But now, his world was filled with bedtime stories, tiny shoes scattered across his once immaculate penthouse, and endless questions about everything from how airplanes stayed in the sky to why he always wore a suit. The transition had not been seamless. There were moments of frustration, of doubt, of wondering whether he was really the kind of man who could be a father. But there were also moments like tonight, moments that made everything else fade into the background. He stood in the doorway of the guest room, watching as Lily and Sophia curled up in their beds, their small forms barely visible under the blankets. The dim glow of a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon cast soft shadows across the walls. It had been Sophia's choice. Lily had picked a stuffed bear from the toy store earlier that week, holding on to it tightly every night since. They had only been here for a short time, but already, the room looked different than it had when they arrived. There were books stacked on the nightstand, drawings taped to the wall, and tiny socks that never seemed to stay in the dresser. The space had started to feel lived in, as if it truly belonged to them. Lily yawned, hugging her bear closer. Are you gonna read to us? Alexander hesitated for a brief moment before stepping further into the room. This had become part of their nightly routine, something he never would have imagined himself doing but had quickly learned was non-negotiable. He picked up a book from the stack, one about a rabbit who went on adventures through a magical forest, and sat down in the chair beside their beds. The first few times he had read to them, he had felt awkward, his voice too formal, his tone too stiff. But now, as he turned the pages, his voice softened without him even realizing it. Sophia closed her eyes halfway through the story, her breathing growing slower, more even. Lily held on a little longer, her eyelids heavy but fighting sleep. By the time he finished the last page, both of them had drifted off. He watched them for a moment, something warm and unfamiliar settling in his chest. He had spent his entire life building something he thought would bring him fulfillment. He had measured success in numbers, in deals, in the size of his company. But this quiet moment, sitting beside two little girls who had somehow become his entire world, felt like something different. Something he had never even known he needed. Carefully, he stood, tucking the blankets around them a little tighter. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from Sophia's forehead, then did the same for Lily. He hadn't planned on this life. He hadn't expected to become a father overnight. But now, standing here, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wouldn't change it for anything. As he turned off the light and stepped out of the room, a soft voice stopped him. "Daddy?" He turned back to see Lily half awake, her voice drowsy. "Yeah." A small smile tugged at her lips. "We love you." Alexander felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't know how to respond at first. The words felt too big, too important, and for a moment, he wondered if he deserved them. But then, as he looked at her sleepy face, he realized there was only one answer. "I love you too." And as he closed the door behind him, he knew that for the first time in his life, he truly meant it. This story is about transformation, about how life can change in an instant and lead us down a path we never expected. Alexander White starts as a man who believes he has everything, success, wealth, and control over his world. But when two little girls step into his life, everything he thought he knew begins to unravel. What makes this journey so powerful is not just the shock of discovering he has daughters, but the slow, sometimes awkward, and deeply emotional process of learning what it means to love them. He doesn't become the perfect father overnight. He struggles, he hesitates, and he questions himself every step of the way. But that's what makes it real. Fatherhood isn't about knowing all the answers, it's about showing up, trying, and choosing to stay even when it feels impossible. The final moments of the story show a man who has not only accepted his role as a father but has embraced it fully. The weight of his past, his fears, and his self-doubt fade away in the presence of something far greater, the unconditional love of two little girls who see him not as the powerful CEO the world knows, but simply as their dad. It's a reminder that success isn't measured in money or status, but in the connections we make, the people we choose, and the love we allow ourselves to give. Alexander's story isn't just about finding his daughters, it's about finding himself. And in the end, that's what truly makes it a happy ending.